thanks for having me. And I'll keep it kind of low-key, very casual. So feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions. I'm just going to take you through my story about RetraceHealth. But before I get started, I just want to hear, I've heard from a few people here, like why they're here tonight, so I can make sure I focus on the right parts and leave out parts that might not be relevant to the group that's here. So are people here because they're going to start a startup one day, or they're in the process of starting a startup, or you're an investor, or you're looking to work at a startup, working on an internal startup?
Looking to start a startup at some point, but more than anything tonight, I was hoping to do some networking and then also to learn from your experience. As we kind of talked about it, I don't think I have the traditional entrepreneurial brain. Maybe that's an oxymoron, maybe that doesn't exist. But just to see the thought process that goes into building a startup, I thought would be a good starting point for me personally.
You have a variety of interests in just all startups and have common threads. What it takes to get on.
I'm a business student at Winona State, and I've been here once before, and I kind of liked it, so I just wanted to see startups in general.
Okay. All right. Very cool. I'll make sure I tailor my talk, in that direction. So I'll intersperse my own philosophies on entrepreneurship, and you can tell me if you agree or if you don't agree. But like we already established, my startup is RetraceHealth. But first of all, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, where I came from and how I ended up doing this, because I really have no business doing what I'm doing, to be honest, and you'll see why. When I finished my undergraduate degrees at the University of Minnesota, I majored in economics and statistics. My first job offer actually was from Mayo in the biostats department, and I pursued it very aggressively. And I came out here, interviewed, they offered me the job, and I turned it down. And I decided to go to graduate school right away instead of work. So I went to the graduate school of statistics at the University of Minnesota, and my final project in the master's program was something that my advisor really didn't want me to do because he thought it had a potential for failure, high potential for failure, which would mean high potential for not graduating on time, which would be high potential, a lot of work for him, to fix that problem. And this is like a nationally renowned statistician at the University of Minnesota. But I had found out that his advisor at Harvard, so his advisor during his PhD program at Harvard was the first statistician in the world to pilot or investigate stylometry. And stylometry is using statistical models to analyze text and then to interpret the text. Just like a human might read text and interpret it. And this particular project that his advisor had done back in the 60s was on the Federalist Papers and some of the second generation Wizard of Oz books. And both of these pieces of literature, the authorship was unknown at the time. And so his advisor used stylometry to analyze these texts and to essentially predict or say who the authors were. And the Federalist Papers are, they're hotly debated still to this day. Some of these papers are unauthored. So I decided to do the same thing with a little bit of a twist, where I want to take ancient Greek text, so 2,000-year-old texts from ancient authors that are unclassified or the authorship is disputed by historians, and then use statistical models that I was using at the time to develop an algorithm to determine who most likely wrote these stories. The problem was I didn't know ancient Greek at the time, so I had to convince my advisor to let me take ancient Greek, in the undergraduate school while I was in graduate school of statistics. So very unorthodox, very, not PC in the statistical world. So I took ancient Greek, and then I learned ancient Greek, and then I took the models, that I was using. This is actually a sample, I was out of my project, and what this is doing is essentially classifying text. So what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to take a bunch of text that I know who wrote the work, and then I'm going to use models to figure out if they look similar mathematically to these unclassified works. So then the next step, of course, is to turn it to computer code. So I wrote a program in Linux on a bash shell, and essentially what it did is it took thousands of ancient Greek texts and broke them up into little tiny chunks and did its magic. And it took me 3 months to do the whole thing. And I usually ask the audience that I'm talking to if they have a guess at how accurate my models were. At least, I shouldn't say how accurate. How closely did they align with historians?
Oh, I see. So,
the
so
stories
you're
and
talking about,
hypotheses.
so you didn't test it against attributed texts. You only tested it against texts that had not been attributed.
Yes, I took attributed text and built the model, and then used the model on unattributed text. Any guesses for how accurate?
10%.
Huh?
10%.
10%? 50?
9.
90?
I'm going to say
67.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you later. No, I'm just playing. No, it was 100% accurate. You know, 100% agreement with historians, which was good, because there was a lot less pushback. And I was working very closely with the Department of Near Eastern Studies at the University of Minnesota. They were very vested in this project. There were some local pastors that were very vested in the project as well, and they all came to my defense. And it was quite a party, statisticians, theologians, and linguists, all standing room only. I kid you not. It was a lot of fun. And this story has two purposes. One, I don't really talk about that much, but given some of the responses in this crowd, I encourage a lot of people to make sure they live their life like it's a story, and write your life like a story. There needs to be like some crowning rules in there that make really good starting off points. Because this for me has always been a great starting off point when meeting investors or partners or employees, vendors, is to have this thing that I've done, that I really enjoy, and I can talk about all day if you ask me to, but gives a little bit of insight into the type of person that I am. And the type of person that I am, and what I bring to healthcare, is the ability to translate things, that may at first seem completely unrelated. The type of person that can do things that maybe people are suggesting or encouraging you not to do. And I would argue that's one of the most important traits for an entrepreneur, is to have some skill, that's unique, some differentiator, some competitive advantage. Just like your company has to have a competitive advantage, you yourself also need a competitive advantage and need not be related to your actual startup. But that's the kind of person I am. So I'm a numbers guy. So I worked as a health economist at Medica Health Plans at United Health Group. I ended up managing Medica's business intelligence department, producing enterprise-wide reports. And then after I did that for a couple of years, I went to business school, the Carlson School, at the University of Minnesota again. And it was while I was at the Carlson School that I started getting a lot more involved in entrepreneurship. But another thing happened while I was at the Carlson School, which is my one and only son was born, in my third semester in business school. And during his first year, he got a very aggressive cough and fever, very aggressive cough and fever, not just a little one. And I'm a very good and educated healthcare consumer, so I always call the nurse line before I go to the clinic. And that's what we're all supposed to do. We all know we're supposed to do that. And so every time I called the nurse line, they told us to come into the clinic. So that happened once, and they sent us back home. So there it is, that first bubble. And the cough and fever didn't go away. So we called again, they called us in. There's bubble number 2, but they sent us home. And I'm on a high deductible plan, $7,000 deductible in 2011. So I'm paying for all these visits out of pocket. So a third time it happens. They tell us to come in, but we get there and they tell us to go home. So each of these episodes, I've wasted about 2 hours of my time. And during this time in my life, I was working on my first startup. So my time was incredibly precious to me. But I like to be there with my son and my wife at the clinic. So I went every time. So the fourth time, so there's bubble number 4. By this time, I know what the problem is. It's pneumonia. I mean, I don't need a doctor's degree to tell you it's pneumonia. But it's pneumonia. So the fourth visit, they finally diagnosed him with pneumonia. And during this visit, I told my wife to just sit tight in the exam room, and I wouldn't look around. So I started walking around the clinic, looking in other exam rooms. I was opening up cupboards. I was opening up drawers. I was looking at exam bays. And I was searching for what is so special about this place that they keep on calling us back here every time, but then they just send us back home. I figured that in this back area that most of us, at least me, had never seen, because I've only ever seen the exam room and the waiting room. So I was like, there must be some magical pixel dust, somewhere in here, that they keep on calling us back, and there was nothing there. Like there was nothing. There was papers and pens, some computers and some crappy monitors, and there was nothing there. The biggest piece of equipment was a X-ray machine, and I know that X-ray machines are actually quite small if you buy a new one. So I started asking myself, well, they could have just done all this via video, or they could have talked to us on the phone, and why not just send someone to the house while you're at it? If you're really looking for a really clean, tight customer experience that someone is going to enjoy. And let me add that this entire 4-visit episode cost $664.28. Like out of my pocket, out of my HSA. It was absurd, on top of my waste of time. So this is where the first ideas of RetraceHealth came from, is I had this experience, even though I've been working in health insurance for, at this point, 6 years, I had never gone to the doctor. But now that I had my own child, I was thrust into the healthcare system and saw how horrible it was. So that's the first problem that I identified. It was a customer experience. The second problem is because getting primary care specifically is sometimes so inconvenient, there are a lot of unnecessary ER visits that are going on right now. And this audience isn't new to that information. Some estimates put it at 30%. In the Fast Company article that came out today, the author quoted 71%, and she cited another article. And the primary reason for these visits occurring is because there isn't a more convenient way to get care. Because these are very simple diagnoses, and employers and insurers are paying for these visits. These visits that cost $534 on average for Medica in 2013 could have been handled in a primary care clinic for $150 or a Target clinic for $80. So there's a huge price tag and a huge opportunity in regards to what RetraceHealth is doing. So if I summarize those two problems, the first problem is a consumer problem. Why are we wasting our time driving to a clinic when that's the last time we actually want to be doing anything? And when you're sick, you're horrible, you're so sick you haven't gone into work, your kid is sick and now you're dragging yourself out in the middle of a Minnesota winter. How do we solve that problem? And then for the employers or the payers, in some cases that's the actual individual on a higher deductible plan, how do we eliminate these avoidable ER visits and avoidable urgent care visits? And the solution is RetraceHealth, or something like RetraceHealth. I'm not the only one trying to do something like this in the country. But the premise is simple. Make primary care easy to get. Make it instantly available and take it to where the patient is. The entire primary care experience is built around a machine that desires to submit a code. And it seeks to make that process as efficient as possible. So of course you would pull the widget in, through your assembly line and do stuff to it. You wouldn't do the inefficient thing and take the care to the patient, even though that produces better customer experience, probably better outcomes, and avoids those unnecessary ER visits. So here's just a quick video of what it could look like.
Herding the little ones to get to their doctor's appointment.
That's a real patient too.
Well, now you have a better choice. RetraceHealth is your friendly neighborhood clinic, where we come to you. We provide affordable and convenient primary care through video and digital visits. You won't have to worry about busy waiting rooms, hour-long waits, or even out-of-date magazines. Beyond medical care, we can do blood work, X-rays, and prescriptions, all without leaving the comfort of your home. We want to provide your family with the best primary care possible on your schedule.
So those are real patients. The little girl in white got a flu shot that day. We were on site at their home filming that, and we've saved that mother huge amounts of time, across multiple visits. So we getting those 3 kids into the van. It was a nightmare. We didn't script that play. She just did what she would have normally done when going to the clinic. So the opportunity is huge. So here you get some classic startup stuff. You know, every investor wants to know what the size of the market is. I find it kind of ridiculous that investors asking me what the size of the primary care market is. You know, so I throw up a number. You know, and I got it from the CDC. You can believe it if you don't, or if you want to. But there's about almost 600 million visits every year. You know, and I've included the estimated number of avoidable ER visits in that number as well. So if you price the average primary care visit at $100, you're looking at almost a $60 billion market for primary care. A small splash in the bucket in regards to overall healthcare, but as a market in and of itself, this is a pretty big market compared to other markets outside of healthcare.
But that's what everybody says.
That is what everybody says.
It was only 50% children.
But it is big, you know, and it's going to get bigger. And so this is a trend that I talk about a lot with investors and my partners when I'm discussing RetraceHealth, is transportation costs are quickly becoming variable in this country and other countries. And that's going to significantly change the culture around the consumption of goods and services as we no longer own cars. Because a consumer is always going to have to make a decision. When I go somewhere, is it worth it to go to that place because it's going to cost me $7 to Uber myself there, you know, or you know, $5 to take car to go, you know, or public transportation, or the time. It's going to cost me time to get there, so it has to be worth it to get there. And so I started asking myself this question when my son was undiagnosed with pneumonia. Is could you have made this experience good enough that I would use Uber to get there? Because I myself am an Uber user, Carnival user. I mean, I use a lot of these services right here. And the answer was no. A, my kid is sick, so I don't want to really put him in an Uber, or walk to the Carnival, or walk to the bus, all this stuff. So again, I came back to, you have to do the Amazon Prime thing. You have to bring it to the consumer, and as transportation costs become variable and fewer people own cars, they will more and more choose to have something come to them instead of going to get that thing, unless there's an experience around that thing or service that warrants the drive. So another trend is distribution is changing. And I don't have to tell you guys this, but we know that many things that we used to physically go get, we don't have to go get them anymore. In healthcare, telehealth is probably the most popular or most well-known version of this issue, where something that you used to have to drive for and consume in a physical manner, you can now get digitally. And RetraceHealth is doing that to not only the telehealth portion, but to the complex portion of primary care, which requires a home visit. So just to kind of set the stage before I get into my business model and exactly how RetraceHealth works, this is 4x4 matrix, and in the upper right-hand quadrant you see RetraceHealth with other startups that have very similar models to what we're doing. You have Pager in New York, founded by some of the Uber guys. You have Medicast in Florida, White Glove Health in Texas. And these companies all have the same thing in common, which is they're sending someone to the home. Some of them are doing it more efficiently than others. I happen to believe that RetraceHealth's model is the most efficient, and I wouldn't be surprised if all these models end up looking the same very quickly, because there really is only a couple of ways to do this very efficiently. In the upper left-hand quadrant, you have telehealth. So pure telehealth, about 30 to 50 conditions that are treatable via online video or telephone. Usually the provider and the patient don't know each other, you know, and subsequent visits are not with the same provider. And then we have the well-known Target Clinic and Minute Clinic in the lower quadrant. And these companies actually, I look up a lot to these two companies down here because they really paved the way for doing primary care different. I mean, before them, everything was the same. There was little change, if any, in the primary care industry. And Minute Clinic was started in Minnesota, and one of the CEOs was on my advisory board, so I got a lot of input into the model from her about the challenges they faced when trying to introduce a new model. And then in the lower right-hand quadrant, we have some of the direct primary care providers, as Keith mentioned, Alliance, Iora Health. Iora just raised another big round of financing, and they're going to double their workforce. Q Alliance has raised a lot of money for their model, and Medline is expanding very quickly. But the thing that makes, I think, the upper right-hand quadrant very attractive is that, for now anyways, they're doing what Paul Graham told the Airbnb founders early on at Y Combinator, is do things that don't scale. You know, like when you're a startup, everybody wants, investors, partners are pushing you to do things that scale. Like that scale instantly, 2 guys can build $1 billion company in their garage, it's pure code, you know, it's in the cloud, you know, you don't have to do anything, you don't have to touch people. And in my opinion, those companies have very low barriers to entry. You know, because if it was that easy, then there's going to be a lot of competitors, there's going to be a lot of new entrants into the market. But when you do things that don't scale, you put the consumer in the center of the experience, and you do whatever it takes to make them happy and create value. And once you create value, we can figure out how to monetize value. You know, you don't need to rush to creating efficiencies and automating things. And that's why I'm really excited about this upper right-hand quadrant, because that's what these 4 companies are doing, mine being one of them, is we're not so much worried about efficiency and scale at the moment. So how did I get RetraceHealth started? It's an interesting story. This thing is bootstrapped from the ground up. You know, when I started it, there were 2 guys that were in my network, some more mature gentlemen, and they just believed in me, and they asked if they could invest. So one guy put in $20,000, one guy put in $15,000 without me even asking. They just wanted to do it. But I needed to prove to myself and to others that this model could work and that people wanted it. So what I did is, before I started the company, like there's no company at this point, I went out and started pitching individuals. So I pitched by about 500 people, and I said, look, I'm going to start this company, and it's going to do this stuff. So if you give me money now, when I start my company, I'll let you be a lifetime member. And I'll give you lifetime access to RetraceHealth, and it's going to look like video care and home visits, something like that. So about 40 families said yes. And Joshua Tams was one of those people that said yes. And as we just kind of kept them going, kept them in the loop as we were building the company up. So once I got those people locked down, then I started looking for employees. So I'm a single founder company, you know, in a world that's dominated by co-founder companies. I only had 2 criteria to be my co-founder. One is you have to be smarter than me, and the other one is you don't need to get paid. You know, those are the only 2 criteria. And I found a lot of people smarter than me. You know, I couldn't find anybody that could just throw themselves at this without getting paid. And a lot of people ask me, a lot of people criticize me for not explaining like the finance part of this. And do you ever listen to Andrew Warner on Mixergy? It's a podcast. Highly recommend listening to Andrew Warner, Mixergy podcast. He interviews a startup founder every day. It's insane, it's intense, but he does it every day. And he's been doing it for a couple of years. And he's really real in his interviews, and he asks these really pointed questions, like, where did you get that money? How much did you make? Like, what was the equity split out? Blah, 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 all this stuff. And I found it really valuable. So for me, in addition to that $35,000 from angels, and then about 40 families that each paid $300 to become members before I started the company, back to my story, you know, with the statistics and all that stuff, there was a insurance company in Minneapolis that wanted me to consult for them. And I kept on saying no, because I was doing the startup thing. They kept on asking, so I finally said yes. And I said, I'll consult for you, but I want to work my own hours, I want to come in when I want, and you have to pay me this ridiculous hourly wage. And I'm only going to work on the projects that I want to work on. And they said yes, because for whatever reason. You know, so I'm doing this thing, it's like the easiest work in my life, making money, and then they wanted me to take on some more projects and increase the scope of what I was doing there. And I was like, okay, hold on. I'm not just going to work with anybody, because I've worked in IT, and not all BI people are created equal. So if you want me to work on these projects, you got to let me bring in my own people, you know, to be on this project with me. So they said yes. So I brought in my own people, and then I built them out to be on my team. So I used that money to keep me going for this, still keep me going for this year and a half. So that's how I did it. That's how I got this far without taking on any VC, without taking on any serious angel money. I got a cash flow stream going. I got some initial customers because I knew I had to test out the operations. And then once I had that going, then I went to some employees and I said, look, I didn't have enough money to pay 3 employees, but I hired 3 employees anyways. And that's just part of, to me, that's just part of being a founder. You just have to do stuff and just make it happen. Even though it seems like there's no way the math doesn't add up, just do it, and you'll be amazed at the connections that you get, the people that you meet that are willing to help. But if you don't do stuff, then no one's really talking about you. No one, I don't meet Keith. He doesn't invite me down here to do all this stuff. You know, I don't meet people at McKesson, you know, and then they introduce me to people at Forbes, introduce me to people at Fast Company. I'm just a regular guy that's doing stuff that looks cool on the outside, you know, but it's really kind of, it hasn't added up altogether on the inside. So I mentioned the team a couple times, and these guys were crazy enough to throw in with me, you know, and accept my promise of fame and fortune and very little salary, and sometimes intermittently. And they're all a really smart group of people. And Kendra, right here, she's actually working with me for over 2 years. She came on board before there was any like real business idea. I just knew I was going to do something, and I couldn't do it alone, and I needed someone to back me up. And then I brought in the rest of these people in the first 3 months of RetraceHealth's life. So down to the business model of RetraceHealth. So it's simple on the surface, so I'm going to kind of go through it at a high level. So what we do is RetraceHealth is an online platform. We're not a clinic. No, we don't provide medical care. We are an online platform, and clinics and providers can use our platform to provide video visits and home care and do all that coordination and scheduling. And they pay us $15, per visit. So there's no upfront cost to the clinic or the provider to use our platform. On the supply side, we have clinics and home care agencies. So what we do is we have providers like nurse practitioners and medical doctors come on our platform, and they provide care on our platform. So our platform does the scheduling again, it does the video visit, it does the coordination of the home visit, moving data back and forth and diagnostic data back and forth. But you can't send out an MD to someone's home. You can't even send an NP out to someone's home. It's far too expensive, which is what some of those other companies are doing. So what we've done is we've partnered with home care agencies, and the home care agencies send out their RNs to the patient's home. They do the blood draw or the throat culture or they look in the ear, send the image back to the ordering provider on the other end of our platform, and get the visit done. So the doctor or NP never leaves the clinic or their home in some cases. The RN is on the road already anyways, so it's no skin off of their back, and they're happy to take our money because we just pay them like a regular business. They don't have to submit a Medicare claim. So to them, we're like gravy on top of their regular revenue flow. And then last but not least, the patient never has to leave their home, which is the entire premise of RetraceHealth. And it's kind of funny. Some of the partners I've tried to partner with, you know, we're in these discussions, sometimes days long, sometimes weeks long, and then they'll ask me questions like, so would you like staff a clinic for us? And I'm like, wait a minute, like my entire differentiator is I bring care to the patient, and you're asking me to staff a physical location and pull people in. Like I get asked this a lot. Like there's something going on in healthcare where we've been entrenched so long that I'm literally in a conversation with you telling you that it's better and more convenient to send care to the patient, and the next sentence will be, how can we bring that patient to us, you know, somehow, in some way. And it never gets sold, you know, so those discussions don't last very long. The demand side, the patient doesn't pay anything to use our platform. They just come to our website, they schedule a visit, and they connect with a medical provider, and they go through the process. Distribution. I've found in my reading and research and own experience in the startup world that distribution is the key to startup success on the business model side. So many people, you know, they work work so hard on making sure they have a good market, they figure out their supply side, maybe they even figure out how to monetize, but a lot of people fail, including myself, my first couple startups, on distribution. How do you get it, the product or the service, into the hands of consumers? And our chosen distribution channel are self-insured employers. That's our phase 1 distribution. And then health insurers, which we're starting to work on now with our second phase distribution. Because these are the most efficient channels for getting RetraceHealth into the hands of consumers. So as a startup, I've been told by my advisors, and my advisors are great entrepreneurs. A lot of them are very successful entrepreneurs, people whose names we recognize in the healthcare space, and they always remind me to not believe my own BS, to not be enamored, of this virtual reality world that I'm creating around myself, where I can just make anything happen if I try hard enough and work hard enough. That this whole thing is based on assumptions, and hypotheses, and sometimes guesses. One of my advisors, Abir Sen, he's one of the founders of Affinity and Red Brick Health and Bloom and now Gravy. In one of my sessions with him, he told me that for him, entrepreneurship is nothing more than uncovering the truth about the world. That the world tells you things work this way. He thinks things work this way as an entrepreneur that are oftentimes in odds with what the world thinks is how things work. But then there's this truth out there that he's pursuing and uncovering it as he goes, and that's how he builds his businesses, and now he's wealthy and rich and all that stuff. Well, so I think it's good advice. So for me, there's 2 important questions that I have to answer about RetraceHealth before we can scale this. The first critical one is how many people in a given population will choose RetraceHealth over other options of medical care. Because I have a very sophisticated Excel spreadsheet with thousands of cells in it, modeling my business down to every single interaction. But the key, the kernel, if you will, is how many patients will I have. And the key to that is of the people I get access to through my distribution channel, what percentage of those people can I convince? And so we're on a path right now at RetraceHealth to have our number. We want to nail down that number by December 31st. We're going to nail down that number, and then we can start going national, scaling, going to employers and saying, look, if you have 10,000 people, 25% are going to use our service. How do you know that? Because we have a sample of 50,000 in Minnesota, and that's what happened. Second question is, how much money will this save employers and insurers? And that can be tied directly to the reduction in utilization in ER and urgent care. So again, by 12/31, we nailed on that number. We go to employers and say 25% of your employees and their dependents will use the service, and you should see a 22% reduction in ER and a 50% reduction in urgent care. So it's not even a sales pitch anymore at that point. It's just a presentation of facts, and they can decide for themselves whether the N is large enough for it to be credible, and whether they think that they can translate those results to themselves. So that's the phase that we're in. The phase that we were in before, like up until the last couple of weeks, was just getting it off the ground. We're just getting patients. We were scraping, we were begging people to have visits. We didn't care if you were sick. We were just like, just use it. We didn't care if you didn't need a home visit. We're like, just let us come out to your house, and try it out. And by the way, fill out the survey at the end of the visit, so you can boost our numbers. So now we're kind of getting past that point where we're starting to get people rolling in. We're getting more employers coming on board. So our pool of people is growing, and our target is to have a minimum sample size of 50,000 people, by the end of the year, and then to get to these solid numbers, and then to start going like crazy. Where am I? So before I get to this, I'll just tell you a little bit about some of the stuff that's happening now. So we've hit some pretty big milestones. So to this date, I haven't taken on any investment, but a large health system in Minneapolis is agreed to invest in RetraceHealth, and they're going to become a client of RetraceHealth. And the reason this is big is, and I know this is being recorded, so I don't care who watches this. That's cool. I've probably spoken with most of the executives of the health systems in the Twin Cities, and we've gotten a very polite but negative response to RetraceHealth. Because if you think about it, we're doing to clinics what Netflix did to Blockbuster. You know, and Netflix tried to partner with Blockbuster before they blew them up and they shooed them away. You know, Apple tried to partner with Best Buy on iTunes, you know, and that didn't go so well. And so we tried to partner initially with these health systems because we said, look, there's these trends. And I went through these trends and said, there's these other startups that are doing this, and I'm doing this too, in this particular kind of way. So it's happening, like, whether or not I do it or someone else does it, whether you want it to happen or not, this is going to happen. You need to start thinking about how you reconfigure your business model where you're not pulling patients into the primary care setting, but you're going out. And the best way to do that is to partner with me, or at least partner with one of those other startups, if you're smart. You know, and we've gotten a flat out no, you know, from most of the health systems, except this one. The CEO is, I think the CEO at this health system is one of the most important healthcare CEOs in the country. And because she has the vision to see what's going to happen, and she has an executive team around her that's creative enough to say, okay, let's do something about this. Because what they're doing is actually very hard. They're intentionally investing in a company that's going to obsolete their clinics. And they got a lot of clinics, you know, in the Twin Cities. And it takes a lot of courage. I mean, but you have to have read Clayton Christensen, you know, like 10 times, you know, to agree to do something like that. And they're doing it, and I'm really excited that they're doing it, and I think it's going to work out well for them. But just to cap it off real quick, this is the operational model for RetraceHealth. I'm just going to go through it real quick so you kind of understand what happens. Patient comes in, they schedule a visit. Step 2, visit data is generated and sent to the provider. Step 3. Step 4, the video visit is conducted. It's almost like a triage process for us. And about 50 to sometimes 80% of the time, the visit stops there. No follow-up care is needed. But if we do need follow-up care, the provider uses our platform to order a home visit from a network of home care providers that we've aggregated. So then a blast goes out essentially to the home care providers, and it's kind of first come, first served. So whoever gets it first gets the visit. They go do the visit, get the diagnostic data, they come back to our platform and upload it, transmit it back to the primary care provider on the other end, and then they follow up the patient via SMS or text or another video visit depending on the results of that diagnostic data. So there's a lot of steps, especially when you compare it to a bricks and mortar visit. But in terms of value, patients love it. And I know patients love it. I'll come back to this slide. I know patients love it, got it in the wrong order, because of this. Now, this is a little old now, doesn't have all our responses, but 100% net promoter score. And there's a question before this in our exit survey, and we asked the patient, did you have any hesitations about getting care this way? And 100% of people said yes. I was highly skeptical. I didn't think it was going to work. It's weird. You know, you're coming to my house. You know, how's that going to work? But then the very next question, they give us 100% net promoter score. They would refer us to their friends and family. And what we want to happen is already happening, even with a small sample size. The largest bar is I wouldn't have gotten any care. And that's a huge problem in my opinion. If there's people in the 21st century in the greatest country on this earth that are putting off care because it's too inconvenient or too costly, that's a problem, you know, that we can resolve. And we're resolving that already at this early stage. Yes, we are skimming other patients from other clinics. You know, that's not a surprise, and that's intentional. But the one I'm really excited about is the urgent care bar. And the reason I'm excited about that is because we're already seeing that people are changing their behavior. That they'll let us come to their home at a price point that's lower than an urgent care visit. So we're saving the employer or the individual or the insurance company money in those situations. And we just opened up our hours. So up until last week, we were only open from 9 to 5. So now we're open from about 6 to 10. So now we're going to expect that emergency room bar to start going up. So we'll start picking off those people that go into the ER really early in the morning or really late. And then for traction, these are some of our customers so far. Really thankful and excited about that first group up there. And I'm excited about the second group too. But that first group, they really took a big chance on us. You know, when we're just getting going, you know, the team was just coalescing around itself. And these companies offered us to their employees. And one of these employers is paying their employees a $10 gift card to use us, to give them a financial incentive to not go to the urgent care. And then these other companies are all coming on board first quarter 2015. So we're already getting, we're getting really close to that goal, of 50,000 lives. So now we just got to hit those numbers and answer those 2 questions before we start taking this outside of the Midwest. And I think that's the end of the presentation. So I'll entertain any questions.
So, how often do you find that you schedule a visit or something and, like all services, you show up and guess what, nobody's there, or, so you end up having to go and you waste your time because they didn't cancel the appointment when they left.
This never happened to date, and I think it's unlikely that it would happen, because usually the person is sick at home anyways, and the value proposition is that you don't have to leave your house, so they're kind of there waiting for us, and we ask them for 3 convenient times and locations where they want us to meet them. So we'll meet them anywhere, even, in the mall or work, back alley, if that's where, we'll meet you anywhere, but typically people ask for us to meet them at home. They give us 3 times, and depending on how early the video visit was in the day, that usually dictates whether the visit is the same day or the next. So if the video visit was at 4, usually the patient is asking for morning times the next day.
Pricing, how do you decide on $15 per lead almost? Have you experimented? I'm sure you've experimented, but kind of tell me more about that process. That's really, really hard to figure out where to start. And it starts at expectations and then...
Yep. Every one of these contracts is different.
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult to nail down the pricing. And then it's complicated by every employer wants their own way of doing it. So right before I left St. Paul to come over here, I was hurriedly typing up a new contract for an employer. It was Schwann's. I was on the phone with Schwann's, and they were like, okay, well, we want to do this and this and this. And I was like, well, why do you want to do that? Because I didn't think what they would want to do was a good idea. They didn't explain to me why. And so I came up with a new pricing on the fly. But I'm able to come up with my pricing really very quickly, so I have a very solid understanding of my unit costs, which is probably one of the most important courses in an MBA program, is your cost accounting course, if any of you ever take do an MBA. I know my unit costs at the back of my hand, so it doesn't matter what someone throws at me. I can usually pretty quickly come up with pricing that allows me to capture enough value to build a business.
You write cost first and then base pricing on your costs.
Yes, which is, you learn in a pricing course, is the worst way to do pricing.
But at least you won't lose.
But at least I won't lose an all.
Yeah.
And once I figure out the value, which is answering those 2 questions, those 2 questions will allow me to set the optimal price, I believe. Once I know how much money I save and how many people I have to convert to save X amount of dollars, then I can just take a slice of that. So my price might go up, it might go down.
So what are the average cost savings if I'm a patient and I'm sick and I'm not going to go to a doctor, I'm going to go or have you guys come to me? So it might be very little.
Yeah. So this is a bittersweet issue for me, because when I started the company, my goal was to make primary care as affordable as possible and as convenient as possible. But the market rejected what I was offering. It was like Rorschach, in The Watchmen. I was trying to do this thing that I knew people would benefit from, but they wouldn't take it, because essentially what I was trying to do was direct primary care. And I knew with direct primary care, I've done my own economic models, that you can reduce overhead by X amount, you can pass those savings directly on to the patient. So I knew that I could cut the cost of a visit in half. But people wouldn't take it because they wanted to flow through health insurance. Well, once you start doing that, all sorts of craziness ensues. And then I would be in conversations with people, and people would prefer the higher price as long as it went through health insurance instead of a lower price paying cash. Especially people on a copay plan, because they don't care what the price is. And even some people on high deductible plans, they would hear cash or out of pocket, and they'd get afraid. And they'd say, well, is it accumulating towards my deductible? I'm like, no, direct primary care, like, it doesn't do any of that stuff. But you just paid half of what you would have paid anyways. And they just get really uncomfortable. So today, sadly for me, there are no cost savings, except for people that come in and pay cash. For our cash paying patients, we give them cash prices.
How do you control for quality of the visit, being the, you determine, independent RMs and so forth, so if they're, if they don't have good customer relations, right, it ends up where all of a sudden you'll start losing that, would you recommend Retrace again?
Yep, so in regards to clinical quality, we stay as far away from clinical quality as possible. And we don't make any guarantees around the clinical quality. But in terms of the experience, in our survey, the patient rates the actual provider, both video and home, by name, and they can tell us if it was a good experience. And if we get enough bad results, then we're going to kick the provider out of the system. And likewise, the provider rates the patient and tells us if it was a good experience for them as a provider, where they want to treat the patient again, were there any complications or troubles with the patient or their family. And if we start getting too much trouble from the patient, they'd be banned from the platform. Because we care a lot about our providers to make sure that they also have a very good experience.
Two questions. Sorry.
Go for it.
How do you get around HIPAA regulation with working with so many different providers and then also doing all this really well?
So I'll answer that one first. So I hate HIPAA. And I mean, if my team wasn't there, I mean, I'd be an outlaw. I'd be breaking the law all over the place. But they're like, no, Thompson, no, we can't do that. And so, I mean, I hate that stuff. So, but thank goodness for my team and advisors and attorneys. So my operations manager, Kendra, has been very good, very creative about how she develops the platform. And pretty much the approach she takes is very modular, and data isn't usually together, ever. So that, because usually what creates a problem is when you put two different types of data together, it's identifiable, blah, blah, blah. So we just break it all up, and then we keep it in different places, and we send it sequentially, separately from each other. And that's how we get around some of the HIPAA compliance, because to be HIPAA compliant, being HIPAA compliant is usually the antithesis of a good customer experience. Like, it's just they're polar opposites. So we've managed to fit ourselves in between by doing things creatively. And another benefit that we have is we don't care to store data. So we're not keeping reams of data. So your HIPAA, your risk increases as the size of your database increases. Well, our database never exceeds 500 records because we're exclusively focused on experience, and all the clinical data is in the EMR of the provider. And our visit data, we can de-identify that and store it somewhere else.
Second question was, just as much as we like to see things go through insurance because there's a paper trail and it's just more of a comfort level for us, we also like continuity of care, right? So a lot of different hospitals are developing their own minute clinics, and my health record is all kept intact. Have you seen that as a threat to this point, and if so, how are you looking to move through that?
That's one of our competitive advantages when compared to. Let's bring this slide back up here. So I have continuity on the x-axis, and it's a provider at a bricks and mortar clinic that's using our platform. So the patient could even go see them in person if they wanted to, or they can choose to have repeat visits with the same provider, and they're charting the same EMR. So there's perfect continuity, just like if you're walking into a bricks and mortar setting. That was very important to us to do that. We're not just taking a doctor in Montana that's sitting on his ranch and having to treat someone in Minneapolis, because there's no continuity there whatsoever.
So they are bricks. they are doing the documentation on their end, and they are keeping it captured in the patient's medical record if they are one of their patients.
Yes, so so if a patient comes to RetraceHealth and they have a visit with a provider, that patient becomes that provider's patient. Whereas to us, they're a customer, like we're a portal almost for the patient to come access to the provider.
Yeah, my question, I think part of it, what I'm dealing with is I think I need to reshape my thinking on how the current healthcare model is. But thinking about it from a personal standpoint, I'm fairly young, I'm healthy, I don't think anything's going to happen, but I get health insurance because in case something happens, right? So I get the basic visits that you could have if you're sick or minor stuff. What happens if something serious happens? Like how does that work? My thought is, yeah, you go to the hospital, but then if you're using like a telehealth type healthcare coverage, then how does that work, I guess?
So RetraceHealth is not health insurance.
That's what I was thinking, but I just didn't.
Yeah, it's
okay.
not health insurance.
Okay.
It's a clinic.
Okay.
No, but it just doesn't have any bricks and mortar. And at least today, in this current incarnation, it's a primary care clinic. So we don't have any specialists on the platform. We don't have any behavioral health special people on the platform. And we're not doing any type of inpatient procedure in the home. It's only things that would be done in a primary care clinic setting.
So you're mostly focused on partnering with businesses and healthcare providers to want to use you, right?
That's important. Providers have to want to use our platform.
Right.
And we're finding that systems don't like our platform. Individual providers like the platform. Because who wouldn't? Like now they can work from home. They can do full service primary care, not just what Teladoc says they can do on the video. They don't even have to stay at home because the technology works on the mobile phone. So there's kind of a disconnect there between the individual providers and then the executives or administration of the system. And I don't know what's going to happen to us. I'm a firm believer that I actually only need one system to partner with me. Really that's all I need. And I can just stuff it full of individual providers if no other system will work with me. Or I can go the other route and work with a different system in every state or every region, but it's not likely that large numbers of systems will be able to be willing to intentionally cannibalize their bricks and mortar.
But one was.
One was.
So I'm just wondering, I guess a related question is, what's your scope of service? How do patients know what care they can receive? So I guess I'm not familiar too with that model in terms of, is it just checking on colds and what type of things can they expect to have?
So what I tell people is we can do anything that can be done in a regular clinic. And then when I say that, people are like, so what about like swabbing the throat? Anything that can be done in a regular clinic. And then usually the next question is something like, so what about like a vaccine? And like, anything that can be done in a regular clinic. And they're like, well, what if you need a blood draw? I'm like, anything that can be done in a regular clinic. And this is very difficult for people to grasp that. And if there's a doctor in the room, they're like, you can't do everything, via video and home. And they start trying to poke holes in it. And I'm like, show me how big the thing is that you use. I can take that to someone's house. And there's a digital version of it, so I can just email it to you, instead of you coming to get it yourself. So we have a designer, she's really smart, and we're really struggling a lot because you go to almost any clinic, or even Target clinic or Minute clinic, and you go to what do they do? It's like this long list of stuff, and it doesn't really mean anything. There's no other industry that just lists like a bunch of stuff, that they do. And we're struggling with that because we want to change that. We want to communicate that to patients and customers in a more meaningful way without listing a bunch of body parts and systems.
And I guess my follow-up question too is, you talked about this earlier about risk. How do you mitigate risk in terms of, these providers are going out to the patient and they're bringing all this equipment and something happens and they go through a storm or something, for example, and they get an
accident? Is there insurance that's provided to them and who covers that? And so how do you mitigate risk and how does it provide to mitigate risk?
So home care agencies already carry all that insurance because they're already in the business of going into people's homes and providing medical care. So doing that for us isn't anything different. It's not outside the scope of the normal service. So there's no issues there. And then the providers are covered under their own malpractice insurance for the video portion of the visits. So RetraceHealth doesn't have any liability, when it comes to medical care or even something like disability insurance. Like we don't carry disability insurance for our home care providers because they already carry that because their staff are already out in the field providing care.
Just curious, this seems like an extraordinary feat for coordinating the physician's time or provider's time, the RN, and then potentially any supplies or vaccines or anything they need. Just curious what your approach is.
It's technology. I mean, there's no paper in our model, in our practice. Zero paper. It's all digital. Most of it can be done through an internet connection. So there's no like client server type software that you can download or anything. It's all logging into something or another on the provider side, anyways, to access the platform. The patient doesn't have to log into anything, have to use the system. They just schedule a visit right from the website. So it is a lot of coordination. And again, that's the differentiator. Like we're doing this really hard work, trying to figure out the best way to do that coordination. And once we figure out how to do that very efficiently and very, very close, then we can scale it once we can quantify the value. And so a lot of investors, probably every investor I talk to, someone in the room says, I just don't see how this scales. And in my mind I'm like, okay, like Burger King scaled, McDonald's scaled, Uber scaled. So even putting those aside, who cares about scaling? Like if you create value and people are willing to pay you more than it costs you to provide that value, and who really gives a rat's if you can scale it in a week or a year? You just do it, and capture that value. So that's kind of where we are.
Have you looked at the models of bees in Europe that are similar to this? No.
No,
I've actually used a model like this before.
I've heard of people someone who was in Paris told me that they're on vacation and someone came to their house and it was awesome,
Yeah.
and everybody thought it was normal there.
Yeah. I was when I was doing my MBA, I had Spanish nurses. My MBA program was in Spain, and I was doing an internship in the UK, and I got sick, and I called the number, and they sent a doctor to me, and it was the most amazing experience of my life. And he even brought medication. I never did the pharmacy.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah. People. That's what happens here. When people experience it, they feel like they're like royalty. Because someone's like a doctor or someone's coming to your house. When you feel really crappy, or your kid who you care about very much, feels really bad. Someone's coming to your house very caring, no matter what the weather, and helping you or that loved one feel better.
Sort of going back to how clinic started, we talked about our history and how frontier practice kind of started. Doctors used to visit out to the patient rather than go to a brick and mortar location. So essentially, it's kind of going back to our origins and how care was provided hundreds of years ago. In some sense, I know it's kind of not going with it.
Yeah, no, it's back to the future.
So we'll get back to the whole, let it be disruptive, go disrupt myself. Not just your experience, but I know you are, well connected to folks with driving similar models. And you started when? When did you start 2011?
We started with that first group of families in 2013.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize. I really didn't realize it was that early.
Yeah, June 2013.
So, what are you hearing from other folks who are obviously not exactly model, but similar models, their interaction with providers that are coming to that same private system that are coming to similar conclusions about disruption on the horizon.
The direct primary care providers get it. One direct primary care provider in the Twin Cities, they just started their direct primary care practice alongside their traditional practice. And he said to me, and they've entered into some capitated arrangements with some employers. And he said to me, you should just treat my patients for me because you can do it at a lower cost than I can in a way that they'll like better than coming in to me. And so Dr. New, he's kind of a well-known direct primary care practice guy. He loves my model. He thinks it's amazing. And I find that people who are themselves innovating, they immediately see the value. But people who are operating and benefiting from the current model typically cannot see the value in this. All they can see are the shortcomings, which exist in almost any startup. There's always shortcomings there. Employers are tricky. So employers that have invested in an on-site clinic do not see the value of RetraceHealth. I kid you not, my friends. In a conversation, you just spent $500,000 on a clinic to put in your building, and you make pillows or something, and they think it's amazing. My employees will come to work when they're sick and use this clinic that's here, that's typically sitting idle. So now I have this huge fixed cost, on my balance sheet. I don't even know how it interacts with their P&L. And then their dependents, the dependents, they can just go to a regular clinic, But then I come in and I'm like, look, instead of putting in an on-site clinic and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and having it sit idle, how about you just have me go to your employees' homes when they need me and just pay me when I do a visit? And they say no. It's amazing. And so those conversations usually don't work. But if I get to an employer who is thinking about doing an on-site clinic, it's like magic. It's like, oh, wow, thank goodness I don't have to do this. Or usually we've been talking about this for 5 years, about doing an on-site clinic, but we just couldn't make it work. And they're very receptive to this notion of bringing care to the home because they're already in the mindset of providing some type of alternative access point to their employees. So in every market, it just depends on where they are.
So how much of that sort of former story could be related to capitalization? They've already baked it as capital expense. They're not looking at it as an operating. Have you had that conversation?
No, I had, and certainly they've capitalized the build out. But the ongoing costs of having a medical provider, it still is there.
It's just that there's an element of capital in
There is.
At some point, that element is going to disappear.
It does. It does. But usually, they're paying a provider to be there. Usually it might be 2 providers, and then they're not even there all the time. So it's not even really accessible. And the cost is the same or higher usually. Like the cost of doing the visit isn't any different than them going to a regular clinic.
I'm surprised you guys got more pitch from the health systems. I'm trying to think of how could we appeal to them and why they are not like it.
That's why.
One thing that comes to mind is the whole 30-day readmission thing that came out as part of the Affordable Care Act, where hospitals are penalized if a patient comes back within 30 days of readmission or their first admission. I would think that it would make more sense that they're going with different models right now. Everybody is experimenting. Everybody is doing something different. And a lot of folks are employing people to call patients after they leave or send people to go to their houses. Very, very expensive models. I would think that something like this would jump off the shelf to them if you presented this to a group and they would say, well, this is a way cheaper model for following up with those patients without having to hire a bunch of staff who now I have to pay for their salary and their benefits and have all that overhead. Nobody is even nibbling at that thought.
No, because these are smart people. So the logic goes like this, and I actually agree with them to a certain extent. is another thing that RetraceHealth is doing to the primary care market is it's changing the arena. So for most clinics, they only care about like 10-mile radius around their clinic. You know, maybe 20 miles or 30 if you're like in a rural area, you know, might get bigger, but that's your market. It's a geographic boundary. So once you hit that 10-mile marker, you don't care if there's a clinic right there because patients aren't going to drive to you, they're just going to go to a closer clinic. But what happens with RetraceHealth, even if you're in an ACO type arrangement, or even if you're trying to tackle readmissions, we've completely destroyed the notion of geography being why or how a patient would choose a provider. So let me walk you through it. So suppose you're living in Rochester, but you like Jessica, who's one of my team members, who's an NP. She could be your PCP, like permanently, because you'll do the video visits and you'll interact, but whenever she needs to physically put her hands on you, she'll do it through one of my home care providers. So now you can expand that across the city, expand it across the state, expand it across the country. So the health system's thinking, wait a minute, if you're breaking down this barrier and I stick you in my ACO, and you're like bringing all these other providers in there, that means all of a sudden a provider in Minneapolis could be competing with a PCP in Arizona, you know, just as if they were right next to each other. And
That's exactly why I partner with you, so that it doesn't happen.
well, but then you've had to have read Clayton Christensen 10 times and let it really soak in, you know, because you don't, most people can't get past that. All they see is I have 50 clinics, 1,000 PCPs, $1 billion in revenue or whatever, because you have to count all that referral revenue. You know, that's really where it's at, is those referrals. And so all of a sudden you're telling me you want to increase competition within my geographic area. It's like, it's no way, because even if you save me money on the readmissions, even if you lower my risk in the ACO model, the health system knows that some of those patients are going to leak to the other providers on the platform. Because one day they'll schedule a visit and the MD will be in, I don't know, Arizona, and then boom, they have a relationship and they never come back.
I'd like to discuss that further.
But that's the rationale, you know, for saying no to working with me, except for this one health system.
And even if, like, let's say you really like a doctor, and this has happened to me, where they've moved to another state or to another hospital.
You still use them. Like it's your doctor. It doesn't matter where they live. They could be in the UK, they could be in Spain.
Yeah.
Because I'll just have a home care provider come and do whatever they need to do, because they're not doing that in a clinic anyways. Because usually it's an MA or an RN. You know, so we've completely destroyed this geographic notion of primary care, and that is the scariest part to this model, you know, for the health systems.
Cool. Well, the camera's about dead, so I think that's where we'll have to leave off. So, give Thompson a round of applause. Excellent job.